Hi everyone, I'm here with Lisa Drayer. Lisa Drayer is an award-winning nutritionist, author, and journalist. Her work in the nutrition, health, and beauty fields has positively impacted countless consumers through her presence across multiple media platforms. As a registered dietitian with degrees in both nutrition sciences and health journalism, Lisa combines her broad knowledge and reporting skills to offer straightforward guidance and is often called upon to moderate wellness panels for organizations in addition to her two books, The Beauty Diet and Strong, Slim, and 30. Lisa is a health and nutrition contributor to CNN and appears in pages of our country's top magazines and her own website, where you can find her at www.lisadrayer.com. So hi, Lisa.
Hi, Sophia. So great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining me today.
Of course. It's a great topic.
Yes, I'm very excited. Just to start off, are you being anything for Halloween, or I know you have two little kids. Are they being anything?
You know, it's so funny. We went into the costume store and it's like slim pickings. It's like very little to choose from. And Brooke chose this like army outfit and she decided she didn't want it. So maybe I'll put that on.
Oh,
Typically, I rotate between the same two outfits of Superwoman and like a cheetah.
yeah.
May try something new this year. How about you?
I'm thinking of being Batwoman, but I'm still trying to put the pieces together to my costume. You know, always the last minute throwing stuff together.
Definitely.
So I was diagnosed with diabetes at the age of 9, and like most diabetics, we're diagnosed pretty young. So I know the first thought in my mind was, can I have sugar? Because when you think of diabetes, you know, the stigma with not being able to eat sugar and all of that like went through my mind. So the first thing I thought of was Halloween, because I'm little and I want to, you know, still enjoy Halloween with my friends and enjoy candy. So can children with diabetes still enjoy Halloween candy?
I'm glad you asked that question because it is a very popular question, not just on Halloween, but as you mentioned, all year round. And the answer is yes. There is no need to feel deprived of candy or high carbohydrate foods if you have diabetes. However, it does just take a lot of planning ahead of time. So you really need to sit down and talk with your parents, with your doctor, come up with a plan. And particularly for Halloween, you want to set limits on the amount of candy that you're going to consume. So that may be 1 candy per day, 2 per day, 5 per week, whatever it is, know what your limits are and have this conversation ahead of time so that you all know what to expect when Halloween arrives.
Yes, I know personally when I was first diagnosed, that's exactly what I did. I sat down with my dad and my doctor, of course, ahead of time, and we made a plan. We listed all the candies, my top favorite ones, and we picked, 2 or 3 that I was going to have in a certain amount of time, and we went from there. It's all about, planning, seeing how your body responds, and then moving from there, like you said.
Exactly. And I'm glad you mentioned, because I was going to give some additional tips, but I'm glad you mentioned like choosing your favorites, because that was one of my tips. So on Halloween, a few other things you want to think about. First is you don't want to trick or treat on an empty stomach, right? Because then already your blood sugar is going to dip as you walk around and do your trick or treating. So you do want to eat ideally dinner, like a protein rich dinner, let's say a piece of fish or chicken or tofu with some vegetables. But if it's not dinner time yet and it's like 4 o'clock, you're going out, you at least want to have a protein rich snack like some cheese or a handful of nuts beforehand. That's the first thing. Also, wait until you get home to eat your candy if possible, because home is a more controlled environment. Your mom or dad are around, and it's just a better time to consume your candy. As you mentioned, you want to be selective, right? So choose what you really, really want. And by the way, this is great advice for all of us. I mean, too much candy isn't good for anyone. So pick like your favorite 4 or 5 candies and then give away the rest. In my house, we often have like a candy store and my girls get money and then they can put it towards their, allowance, and then they can purchase something. So we make this candy store. We do math skills. It's a lot of fun, actually. As I mentioned, set limits, know ahead of time what your limits are. And also for extra coverage, you can pre-bolus with insulin 15 minutes ahead of consuming candy. And this way, your body is ready. So the insulin is activated by the time that sugar floods the bloodstream. So it just helps you to prevent dramatic sugar spikes.
Yes, that's all very helpful information and stuff that I incorporate into my everyday life, regardless if it's Halloween or not. Like you mentioned, eating before, I also noticed that that helps me feel less hungry. So that means like I don't necessarily want to eat as much candy. So that's also helpful, and then also helping, to kind of keep my blood sugar kind of steady before all the exercise that comes along with trick-or-treating.
Exactly. It's never good to leave the house on an empty stomach. So particularly if you have diabetes. So yes, I'm glad that you do that.
Yes.
When you take a snack before trick-or-treating, do you have like a favorite snack before you leave the house, or is it just whatever's around?
Um, Traditionally, I like to do if we have like any cucumbers or peppers around with hummus, and then obviously some crackers. I like Mary's Gone crackers. I noticed that those don't have a big spike on my blood sugar too, and they help me be steady. So that's also lower in carbs, so I don't have a spike on top of another spike if I'm going to be having candy. So that's kind of the way I approach everything.
It's a great, great idea.
Yeah. So I noticed that there's a big difference in my blood sugar as to when I eat something that's more chocolate-based compared to something like a Sour Patch or a Swedish Fish. I noticed that the chocolate one has like a more gradual like impact on my blood sugar, and it won't spike me as much. So what are your thoughts on that, and can you give any of your top recommendations to diabetics who want to enjoy candy?
Right. Well, as you mentioned, chocolate actually contains fat, unlike a lot of other candy, which is just pure sugar. And the fat is from cocoa butter. And as you say, it's sort of gradually, it helps the sugar to gradually enter the bloodstream. So you're not going to spike and then crash. So chocolate is definitely a fine option, especially for people with diabetes. And also, I like chocolate with nuts, the combination, because the nuts give you healthy fat and also a little bit of protein, which again, protein and fat help to blunt that rise in blood sugar. And so my favorite picks are small portions of chocolate and nut combinations. And also the bigger the portion, the bigger the blood sugar. So that's just like a general guideline too. So I really like fun size candy. So it's a little bit, these peanut M&Ms moved around, but a fun size packet of peanut M&Ms. So it looks like this.
Yeah.
It's a fun size. It's 8 peanut M&Ms and it has only 11 grams of carbohydrate. Snickers has 10 grams. And these Reese's peanut butter cups are great. So each of these minis has 5 grams each and a gram of protein. And this one has 12 grams of carbs and 2 grams of protein. So what they all have in common is the chocolate and the peanuts, which have the healthy fat and a little bit of protein, which is really beneficial for blood sugar.
That's great. And I know it's a bit easier on Halloween because when you go trick-or-treating, you normally get those little packets. But just in general, I know it's easy to just kind of like keep eating something out of like, a reusable bag or whatever it is. So that's definitely helpful in making sure you're bolusing the amount of insulin, the correct carbohydrates you need, and taking care of your diabetes while enjoying Halloween at the same time.
Exactly. And you're right. The fact that so many Halloween candies are prepackaged is really helpful.
Yeah. So to add on to what you just said, is there a range of carbohydrates you suggest diabetics stay within? I know sometimes it's hard to be exact, but is there a goal people should aim for?
So I think when it comes to what you should aim for, this is really individual. So everybody has different needs. It really depends on each person and what their situation is, what they've eaten beforehand. So that's something that you want to talk about with your parents or your doctor, just to make sure you know what your own limits are. So it's hard for me to sort of give a number. Typically in nutrition, we say 15 grams of carbohydrates is like considered 1 carb serving. And so that I would think is a reasonable amount, but the actual amount that you may need could be a little bit less, depending on whether or not you've eaten before, whether you've pre-bolused or not, whether you've been active or not. So there are a lot of variables that go into your limits.
Yes, I totally agree with that. In the fall, I play volleyball, so that number is completely different than what it would be like on my off season. So you just kind of have to see and take it day by day and see how your own body responds.
Right. And you know what? I think it's also a good idea, like to take a day and to write down what you eat and what your blood sugar, I'm not sure if you do this, but to sort of see how your body is processing sugar and with the amount of insulin that it's getting. So you might better predict, when you're going to get that spike depending on your activity or what you're doing during a certain time of the day. As you mentioned, the volleyball. So you're probably very active, exercise can lower blood sugar. So I imagine you adjust for that.
Yeah, so I used to do that when I was first diagnosed, but now with all the technology, I have the Dexcom continuous glucose monitor, so that will already tell me my trend, so I could see if I have one arrow going up or two being like the greatest spike, so then I can kind of see which candies I should really avoid and which ones will allow me for like a better outcome.
Right. It's amazing how technology has advanced. And I'm so happy that you're able to take advantage of that because that's so ideal. It takes the guesswork out of it.
Yeah.
It's something sort of built in and one less thing you sort of have to think about. I mean, you always have to be aware, but it just makes life a little bit easier, which is nice.
Yes, for sure. And without all the finger pricks and having to constantly, this is just one glance at your phone and you're ready, where you're heading. So
it's amazing.
Great.
Yes.
Yeah. So is there a difference between milk chocolate and dark chocolate, and which one is the better option for type 1 diabetics?
Right. So not all chocolate is created equal. Dark chocolate, I would say, is the healthiest chocolate simply because it has the highest amount of flavanols. And these are compounds in cocoa solids, and they have antioxidant properties. And what this means is that they help protect cells from damage that could increase the risk of certain diseases down the road. So dark chocolate has the most amount of these flavanols. Milk chocolate is the next in line, and white chocolate has none because there's no cocoa. So the cocoa gives you those beneficial flavanols. Also, milk chocolate, I love milk chocolate. It's very creamy and delicious, and that's because cream and milk and sugar is added. So dark chocolate is typically lower in sugar than milk chocolate as well. So I often recommend even like these dark chocolate squares. So like 2 of these have only 11 grams of carbohydrates. And they're a nice, like even after dinner, if you want a little something sweet, they're packaged, you can throw them in your backpack, they're just good to have. And you're getting the beneficial nutrition from dark chocolate, which by the way, cocoa also has minerals. So it has some calcium, it's not like drinking milk, but there's some calcium, iron, magnesium, potassium, and zinc as well.
Wow, those are all really good things to consider when, you're stuck between something with milk chocolate and dark chocolate. And, sometimes it's better to just go for that dark chocolate just because it's better for you and will have a better outcome.
Right. And typically the higher that percentage of cocoa, the more flavanols that are present, but sometimes it can get a little bit bitter. That's sort of like an individual preference.
Can you tell me the name of those squares? Because I've seen them before.
I think people might want to know. It's Ghirardelli. It's called Intense Dark Chocolate with Sea Salt. 6 grams of carbs, 50 calories, 6 grams of carbs. Fat is 4 grams. Protein is less than a gram. So there's 4 grams of fat, but only 6 grams of carbs in this little chocolate.
Wow, that's interesting. I know those chocolates, though, can be a little bit pricey, and I know that sometimes your neighbors won't always put them out for people to take. So do you recommend maybe buying them ahead of time and putting them in your bag?
If someone in your household has diabetes, you might want to be the one that offers those as the Halloween treat. So that way you kind of have your supply of them that you can use for future, but it's also giving people that option. It's like in our house, my husband, he loves dark chocolate and, he doesn't have diabetes, but he just wants something that's a treat that's lower in sugar. And so it's just something nice, especially I find after a meal, it's really nice to just have a little sweetness.
Yeah, and I know I've had those before. They can be a little bit more like rich than like a Kit Kat bar. So that is, I feel like a little bit more satisfying, and it's also more controlled, and you don't need to have as much of them to feel satisfied at the same time.
You're absolutely right. I feel like the richness kind of adds a little kick, and it kind of like cuts the appetite a little bit. Like it just makes you a little bit satisfied with a little bit less.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that's a great tip, kind of maybe look for that brand when you're trick-or-treating, or to plan ahead of time, and this can also be a part of your plan, but to kind of buy those and stick like maybe 2 in your bag or whatever you bring, and to kind of opt for those too.
I think it's a great idea.
So what advice do you have for parents of type 1 diabetics? And I know personally for me, I didn't want my mom or my dad literally glued to my side when I was trick-or-treating. So how do you suggest parents go about this when, they're kind of letting their children go freely around the block and getting as much candy as they want, essentially.
Right. So parents just want to make sure that they're talking with their children about strategy. How are we going to navigate Halloween? And again, you want to have this conversation ahead of time. You don't want to wait till Halloween and then, things may get tense and argumentative. So you want to have this conversation a few days ahead, set your limits, know what you're going to have. You may even have a guideline such as if something comes in a 15-gram portion size, putting it in its separate bag, and maybe you use that to treat a sugar low. So this way you're not totally eliminating all candy, but basically just you want to have that communication. Parents can also talk to the parents of your child's friends, so that the other parents are on the same page, the teachers in the classroom, if there are parties going along. So the more people that are aware of your situation, the better prepared you'll be. And, you'll feel more supported that way. So at first it seems like you said, I don't want mom and dad at my side, but really, they're your advocates and they can help other people support you during this time because it is challenging.
Mm-hmm. I really like what you mentioned about making 2 different bags and stuff that's more like Sour Patch and stuff that's more like chocolate, because then, as you said, like you don't feel deprived. You could possibly have it later when your blood sugar is dropping, or maybe even on your walk around the block, you see that on your Dexcom, if you have one, that you're dropping or you feel low. So then maybe that's a better time to have that kind of candy opposed to when you're a little bit on the higher side and maybe it's not the best idea.
Exactly. And so a lot of candies like Skittles and gummy bears, candy corn, jelly beans, these are all mostly sugar. So you're not getting that benefit of the fat, which slows the rise in blood sugar. But on the flip side, there is a benefit, right? If you have low blood sugar, or like you say, you're experiencing a low. And in that case, you can sort of have your stash of high sugar candies pre-portioned, in 15-gram increments. And that way you kind of have them handy and they're individually portioned, so you can grab a portion. You might have to count out candy corn or ahead of time, put them in little bags, but that way they're sort of ready to go. Or like I said, if they come in individually wrapped containers too, that can work. So just read the labels and sort of have these available to you, and just know you're not going to choose them as your first choice when it comes to candy, but certainly you can enjoy them at a later date.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I totally agree. And I know you mentioned candy corn, so I know that's like a staple and a classic Halloween candy. How many carbohydrates are in just one candy corn?
Right. So there are about 2 grams of carbohydrates in just one candy corn. So if you want candy corn, 8 is the magic number. That's 16 grams, about 16 grams of carbohydrates. So I know it's sort of, not the most fun to kind of count them out and put 8 in the bag and this and that. But on the flip side, it could just give you that little boost, little bit of sugar that you're craving, especially if you're having a sugar low. Again, it wouldn't be my first choice. Something chocolate and something with nuts, would be my first choice frankly, for everyone.
Yeah, and I know it can be so easy. I normally find the candy corns in like a bowl. Sometimes I've gone to my friend's house and they have them out in like their living room, and it's easy just to kind of take a handful and go from there. But it's kind of good to know how many carbohydrates are in just one, because it takes away having to kind of guess at the same time.
Exactly. And when it comes to gummy bears, these are also very sugary. So nine of these bears have 23 grams of carbs. So this also is not the best choice. So you would want to eat fewer in order to keep that carb limit in place. Mm-hmm. So just read those labels carefully and know your limits, and then portion accordingly. Also, I do want to say there's a great resource. JDRF has a website. I've been like circling my picks, and you can see the carb counts on their website, and they basically show you, how much is in different candy bars. So for example, it kind of shows you that at 3 Musketeers, if you have the fun size, that's only 12 grams of carbs. But if you go up to a bigger bar, it's 45 grams of carbs. So, that's like almost 4 times the amount. So it kind of just shows you what you're getting. Some of the other ones are, the gummy bears are high, but you can see also like Hershey Kisses, 6 pieces have 16 grams of carbs, and that's chocolate. So all this is sort of consistent with what we're saying. The M&Ms, the peanut do have a little bit more in terms of carbohydrates, but I think it's worth it. So for example, a small bag has 13 grams of carbohydrates, whereas the plain M&Ms have 10. But I think it's worth it just to have like 2 or 3 more grams in order to get the healthy fat and the protein. But yeah, JDRF is a great, great resource, and it can really help you. Ultimately, you do want to look at what you're eating though, because the labels can vary, depending on what size package, and a lot of them seem very similar, minis, fun size. So just make sure you read those labels.
Yeah, and something that I would do would be even to, take a picture of that printed out, put that as your wallpaper on your phone or your lock screen, and then anytime you want to have a new candy that you're not exactly sure what the carbohydrates are, you can kind of open your phone and tap on it, and then it's right there. You could go down the list, find, which candy you're about to have, and then it makes it easy and takes away having to, look everything up, going on the website. So again, with the planning and just thinking ahead, just to make your life a little bit easier.
Absolutely. It's great. It takes the guesswork out. But like I said, make sure you also read labels whenever you can, just to make sure it's consistent. But yes, as a quick reference, this is great. It's fabulous. So be sure to check that out at the JDRF website.
Yes. Do you have any maybe off-brand types of candy that you recommend that are lower in carbohydrates? And how do you feel about sugar substitutes as that being an alternative?
Sure. So first, I'll just address the sugar substitutes. I'm not really a fan. Sugar alcohols, for example, they still contribute. They don't contribute as many carbs and as many calories, but you still sort of have to factor them in. And they can also contribute to GI distress. So I say just eat the real thing and, limit the sugar overall. So you really just have to take into it. They're not 0 grams of sugar. So it can be a little bit tricky. In terms of other treats, I love dark chocolate dipped fruit, like dark chocolate dipped strawberries, and then you're getting a little antioxidant boost from the fruit. Also, my girls and I, every year we make these Halloween treats. We make monster mouths. Basically, it's apple slices that are lined with peanut butter, and you put 2 apple slices together. And the peanut butter, once it's lined with peanut butter, it sticks, and then you stick a few mini marshmallows. And it's really cute and it's fun and it's nutritious, because it's mostly apples with peanut butter.
Oh, wow.
Another one that I love is like witch's broom. So you take like string cheese, you cut it in half, and like you make little slits in the bottom, and you put like a mini, those mini pretzel sticks, you put one on top, and like you tie like a chive around the bottom. And
Wow.
that too, it's a great nutritious snack, and it's like fun because it's Halloween. So it's just a really nice way to sort of be in the spirit of Halloween and have more nutritious options.
Oh, wow. That's so awesome. I love that you do that. It's like a little bonding too, but it can also, teach them how to make the most out of Halloween. I know you mentioned GI. Can you explain what that is?
Okay, sure. GI, gastrointestinal. So basically, sugar alcohols are absorbed differently from sugar. They're not like completely absorbed. So the good news is less sugar goes into the bloodstream, but there's also this side effect where it can cause gas, diarrhea, but typically it's when it's eaten in large quantities. But some people are more sensitive than others to sugar alcohol. So to identify them, typically they end in OL, so xylitol, sorbitol, and it should say on the label like how many grams of sugar alcohols are in that serving. But yeah, GI distress is not fun. GI, again, just a short way to say gastrointestinal. It's a little birdie. Typically, there's not too much to worry about if you're just having like a couple of pieces of candy.
Okay. So how do you suggest someone going about planning or Halloween in general if it's their very first Halloween as a type 1 diabetic?
Right. So the first year can be particularly challenging. You want to make sure you're communicating with your child, if you're a parent, also teachers at school. Let your teachers know, what your child can or cannot eat. And this doesn't necessarily mean no candy, right? It just means like limits, whatever limits you set in place. So all of the same rules apply, all the stuff that we've been talking about. Another thing is to talk to parents, other parents, especially parents of friends that your child is hanging out with on Halloween. And lastly, I want to suggest hosting your own Halloween party. First of all, it gives you control, right, of the situation, like what you're serving, what you're having, what's available. But also there are so many fun things that you can do that don't involve candy. So you can have, a Halloween scavenger hunt or pumpkin carving, a costume contest, watching a scary movie. So I think that's a way to sort of make it fun, especially if it's the first year and it's kind of like a bummer. You kind of feel like, oh, I have to limit myself now. But in this way, it kind of makes it a little bit more celebratory and you could still have a lot of fun. And the good news is if you can survive Halloween and get through Halloween, then you're in really good shape for all the holidays that are going to come up after. So consider it sort of like a test run.
Yeah, I love that idea, actually. It's great because it takes the emphasis away from just solely candy because there's so many other great things you could do, like you mentioned, that isn't just around candy.
And for everyone, right? So it's not only people with diabetes, but, people who are, have other health issues or people who just want to limit their sugar intake just for health reasons. So it's a great idea all around.
Yeah. So any last tips or words of advice that you would give the type 1 diabetic community about Halloween?
I would say, have that plan in place and then have fun, make sure you're enjoying yourself with friends, really try to incorporate some activities that don't involve candy, whether it's watching a movie, going on a scavenger hunt, carving pumpkins, whatever it is that makes you happy. And remember, it's only one day. So keep that in mind. It gives you a little perspective. And just know that if you can get through Halloween, you'll be in really good shape for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all of the holidays that follow.
That's a really good closing words of advice because you're right, it is really only one day. It seems like the biggest deal in the world when you're young and that is what's on your mind. It's supposed to be like a fun holiday, but it's really one day and you'll get through it. So we all do. We learn and every year you get better at it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And you're the role model for that. You can speak it from the heart because you've been doing that. So kudos to you.
Trial and error, that's what I live by. So thank you so much for being here today with me. It really means a lot. Lisa and I, we know each other since I was born, so it's really been a great pleasure for her to be here with me. And thank you so much for taking the time out of your day.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I love you and your family, and I'm so happy that I could be of help to you and all others who are dealing with type 1 diabetes and Halloween.
Thank you so much once again. Bye.
Bye-bye.